This is an updated tutorial on the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space Disclosure and Addendum Form FHDS revised June of 2025. The last version was from 2021. I don't think much has changed, but this form may be required on your transaction, and it looks kind of complex, but I'll simplify it and make it fast and easy to fill out. So we start here by putting the date of the purchase agreement from the transaction, property address, names of the parties, and then section 1 explains when this is applicable. And to answer that, it's a seller of a residential property between 1 and 4 units that is also required to do a TDS form, transfer disclosure statement, which is the majority of sellers, and that property must be in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. Now, how do you know if the property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone? Well, the easiest way is to look at the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report, the NHD, okay? So it'll tell you on the NHD if it's in a fire hazard zone, high or very high. Now, what if you don't have an NHD handy? Well, it tells you here that you can do a web search for this fire hazard severity zone viewer, and you'll find something like this website through CAL FIRE. And if you scroll down, you can put an address in here, and it has a GIS map, and it'll give you different viewers for different maps, and explains ways to search and how the different severity zones work. And I mean, I'd probably look for the NHD since you're preparing that with disclosures anyway, but it's up to you. You can search for a zone viewer online, or you can look at the NHD. They have this other website here for defensible space. It's a good resource. You can pull it up and it tells you how much defensible space. You can request a defensible space inspection. And also you can contact your fire department and ask them about this if you want to. Now let's get into the form itself. So let's say the property is in a high or very high fire hazard zone. Okay, well, we come down here to section 2. Now, was the property built in 2010 or later? If it was, you can skip 2B and 2C and go all the way down to 3. But we're going to pretend that our property was built in December of 2009. How about that? We just missed the cutoff date. So that means we have to fill this out. But this is actually quite simple because it's asking if the seller is aware of fire hardening vulnerabilities. And now sellers get a little squeamish about this stuff. They get nervous because they're worried that if they put no and there truly was a vulnerability, they're going to get in trouble. But that's not how disclosures work. Disclosures work by asking the seller, are you aware? Are you aware of it? If you're not aware, then put no. It's not asking if such thing exists. And if it does, but you didn't know, you're in trouble. It's asking if the seller's aware. And as long as the seller's honest, they won't be in trouble. So it asks all these questions about eaves, soffit, roof ventilation, roof coverings, combustible landscaping. And the seller just writes yes or no. If an explanation is needed, they write it in here and they move on. It's really simple. Not much to think about. Are you aware of this? Yes or no. Move on. Then you have to fill out if the sellers completed any of the following low-cost retrofits during their ownership. Again, it's asking the seller questions. The seller's going to know because they either did it or they didn't. It's really simple. There's not much to deliberate when it comes to answering yes or no in these. You either know it or you don't. And if you don't, you put no. Now you're down in paragraph 3. Okay, now it's going to ask this. Is there a local compliance requirement? And it's asking you to put basically yes or no, is or is not, okay? Now, people get nervous about this because they don't know. Well, what this form does is it gives you a little cheat sheet, step 1, and it gives you a few places to check. You know, if I didn't know whether or not a property, let's say I was a seller, if I didn't know if it was under a local ordinance, I would call the local fire department. I mean, it's really that simple, okay? And it likely is if you're in a city, okay? But you're going to check either is or isn't, and then move on. Now, if you do nothing in 3B, it says by default, sellers unaware of whether the property is in compliance with state or local defensible space law, okay? meaning the seller doesn't know, they're unaware. And that's it. They can move on. That's what most people do. If you do nothing else in section 3 after you put the is or is not, this form's still complete, because by default, 3B says seller's unaware, and 3C says it's the buyer's responsibility to look after things after closing. So that's, as a broker, that's what I see a lot of people do. They just leave 3B and 3C alone and let the default verbiage be the answer. Now, you, of course, can change it. And you can say that, hey, it's in compliance and we know for a fact, for whatever reason. I mean, this is something the seller should know, because the seller will have gotten a letter or called the fire department or ordered this. Remember this link I showed you earlier? You can get you can order an inspection. Let me jump back. Request a real estate defensible space inspection. So if they really want to be cautious, they can order one of those, or just call the fire department. I mean, it's really not a big deal. And then they can leave this here, seller's unaware, or check if one of these other scenarios applies to them. Same down here. Now, 3C, just to wrap this up, buyer responsibility, no local ordinance. There's no local ordinance that the seller's aware of, and it's the buyer's responsibility to take it over. And if there's some sort of compliance documentation needed, they'll get it within a year of closing escrow. They're on their own. Basically, this just tosses the hot potato to the buyer, and the buyer's got to deal with it on their own. And if you do nothing 3C, then that's how it works. Now, if you want to change it for one of these reasons, then read each of these line by line. I'm speaking to the seller, so a listing agent can just inform their seller, hey, if you do nothing, you put it on the buyer. But see if one of these applies, and a seller will know, because if they don't know, they should leave it alone. And if they see something like this and it makes more sense than C1, then they can check the box. But again, there's not a lot of deliberation here. It's real simple stuff. Does none of this stand out? Okay, then leave it alone. C1, leave it alone. Don't do anything. Don't check any boxes. All right, and if you have a report, you can put it down here. If it's a new construction, you check this box, and you either give the buyer a report or you check this box and tell the buyer where they get the report. This is on maybe a spec home that was built, or it was a total rebuild, maybe an investment property that was a tear down, something like that. That's it. I mean, that's really how simple this form can be. Most people go through it doing the absolute minimum. Let's say the home was built before 2010. They fill this out with a yes or no, and then they put is or is not, and they leave the rest alone, and then they sign it and give it to the buyer, and that's it. That is it. That's how simple it is. Now, they have this decision tree down here. If you get lost, if you go off the path, you can climb the decision tree and figure out where you are, how you got lost. And this starts at where I was showing you in 3A, where it says is or is not, and it even tells you how to find out. And then you can go on from there if you want to. Kind of explains in more depth what I was talking about in the video. Look how long that is. 2 full pages for a decision tree. My gosh. You know, this form, it's the heart. I'm not going to blame CAR for this, because this is a state law. This form conforms to the legal verbiage, where I think the intention is the right direction, but this is a mess. This is a shameful mess of a form. And I think there's a much better way that this could have been implemented to allow people to determine the fire vulnerability. Now I'm just ranting. So to determine fire vulnerability without this sort of mess in here, because this is more confusing than helpful. Okay, rant over. Hope you found it helpful. Thank you for watching.